Have you ever felt invisible in your own marriage? Not just ignored, but completely shut out from someone you trusted with your heart? That's exactly how I felt. For months, my husband Mark refused any kind of intimacy. Not just physical, but emotional too. No hand-holding on the couch, no late-night talks, nothing. It was like living with a stranger who shared my name and my house, but not my life. At first, I told myself it was stress, work pressure, maybe even a rough patch. But deep down, a gnawing suspicion started to grow. Something didn't add up. But before we continue, please subscribe and turn on the notification bell for updates. Mark, 35, had always been charming, the kind of man who could make people feel like they were the only person in the room. But suddenly, that charm felt cold. Texts disappeared as soon as I looked at them. Phone calls went unanswered, or he'd pick up just long enough to say, "I'm busy." There were little things too. The faint scent of perfume that wasn't mine, receipts from restaurants I'd never visited, and a subtle, nagging shift in his behavior. And yet, I stayed calm. I watched quietly, gathering pieces of a puzzle I didn't want to exist. Have you ever noticed patterns that seem too deliberate to be accidental? The kind that prick your gut every single day until it hurts? That's exactly how it was with Mark. Every lie left a trace, every excuse a tiny crack in the carefully constructed facade. And then, as if to confirm my fears without saying a word, he started distancing himself even more, sleeping in the other room, working late more often than ever, and avoiding any conversation about us. I knew something was wrong. I didn't yet know the full truth, but instinct told me it was serious. So serious that it would change everything I thought I knew about my marriage. I started making mental notes, paying attention to details he thought were invisible. And then, one evening, just when I thought I could breathe a little, he said something that made my stomach drop. Something I had been bracing for without even realizing it. That night, at dinner, Mark looked at me with a seriousness I hadn't seen in years. He said words that I wasn't ready to hear, but I already suspected he would. And even though my heart was racing, I forced a smile. What came next would set the stage for a confrontation and revelation that neither of us would ever forget. Have you ever felt someone disappear from your life, without leaving at all? That's what Mark did. Not physically, but emotionally. The months leading up to that dinner were like living in a house that had slowly turned into a museum, everything familiar, but cold and untouchable. He refused intimacy. Not just sex, but even the small gestures that once meant the world, holding my hand on the couch, laughing together at silly jokes, sharing a quiet drink after work. All gone. At first, I told myself it was stress. Work deadlines. A promotion. Maybe even a midlife crisis. But there's a difference between a husband who's tired and a husband who's distant. I started noticing the patterns. Phone calls that disappeared when I walked into the room. The faint perfume scent that didn't belong to me. He was charming at work, even social, but at home, absent. And yet, he expected the house to run perfectly, meals to be on time, smiles on my face, as if nothing had changed. It was confusing, painful, and sometimes infuriating. How could someone who once claimed to love you treat you like a ghost? But that's what made it even more dangerous. I began to pay attention. Every detail. Every little lie. Receipts for dinner dates I wasn't invited to. Late-night texts that disappeared too fast to read. Small things that didn't make sense unless there was someone else. And my gut told me the truth. Mark was cheating. But here's the twist. Instead of confronting him immediately, I stayed calm. I watched. I planned. Because if you confront someone too early, they cover their tracks. You never get the full picture. I had to see everything, gather proof, and wait for the perfect moment. Have you ever had that feeling, the mix of anger, fear, and determination that something bigger is about to unfold? That's exactly where I was. And then one evening, the tension reached a peak. A single text appeared on my phone. A message from Mark that made my blood run cold. "We need to talk. I can't do this anymore." Just like that, months of cold silences and emotional walls had finally led to a breaking point. The stage was set, and I knew that dinner would be the turning point. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. Have you ever sat across from someone you once loved and realized you barely know them anymore? That night, I did. The table was set perfectly, the soft hum of our favorite restaurant in the background. I could feel my heart pounding, but I forced myself to breathe slowly, keeping my face calm. Mark, 35, looked at me with that same charming smile I used to adore, but it didn't reach his eyes. Those eyes were cold, calculating, and distant. The first few bites of our meal were painfully quiet. I asked a casual question about his work, hoping for some clue, some slip that would confirm what I already suspected. But he evaded every detail. Then, mid-bite, he stopped and said it, "Emily, I can't do this anymore. I want a divorce." The words hit me like a punch. My chest tightened, my stomach lurched. But here's the thing, I wasn't shocked. Not really. I had suspected this was coming. I had pieced together months of little signs, small betrayals, and subtle lies. And even though my heart ached, I stayed calm. I smiled and said the only word that would keep him off balance: understood. Mark blinked, clearly expecting tears, anger, a fight. But he got nothing. Just calm. Just control. And then I put it on the table. Literally. A folder. Inside, I had all the evidence I'd quietly gathered over the past months. Messages, photos, receipts, everything he thought I didn't notice. Everything that would confirm his betrayal. You should have seen his face. Pale, trembling, the charming mask finally slipping. I didn't yell. I didn't accuse. I let the evidence speak for itself. And as he fumbled for an explanation, I realized something crucial. Sometimes, the most powerful revenge isn't shouting. It's showing the truth at the exact moment someone thinks they have the upper hand. Have you ever felt that quiet power, the kind that doesn't scream but makes someone squirm? That was me, sitting there across from Mark. I wasn't angry. I was patient. I was calculated. And yet, even in that moment, I knew the evening wasn't over. There was one final move I had been waiting for, one that would truly shock him and change everything between us. And just when I thought he might recover, I leaned forward and said something that made his eyes widen even further. But what happened next would completely unravel the story he thought he controlled. Have you ever watched someone's carefully built world crumble before their eyes? That's exactly what happened next. Mark, 35, had thought he was in control. He had thought I was oblivious, fragile, unaware. But the moment I laid the evidence on the table, the power shifted. His eyes widened, his lips parted, and for the first time in years, he was speechless. I leaned back and let him stew in silence, the folder between us like a dam holding back months of truth. Messages to Sarah, his coworker, late-night dinners he claimed were work meetings, the receipts, the photos. Every little detail, all perfectly aligned to prove what I had suspected: he had been cheating. And now it was undeniable. I didn't need to yell. I didn't need to cry. I didn't need to beg. I just let the truth speak, and it screamed louder than any argument ever could. Mark tried to justify it. "It wasn't what you think," he stammered. Emily, you don't understand, but I already did. I had understood for months. Every excuse, every diversion, every lie had been mapped out in my head. And I realized something important. Sometimes, people reveal more in their panic than they ever could with honesty. His scrambling, fumbling words only confirmed what I already knew. And the most shocking part? While he was trying to defend himself, I noticed how easy it had been to gather all this evidence. The truth, when you pay attention, leaves little breadcrumbs. Every lie, every secret, every hidden text message, they all tell a story if you're willing to read it. I looked at him and asked a simple question. Did you really think I wouldn't see this? He couldn't answer. He had no defense. And that's when I realized the full weight of months of betrayal and silence. I felt a strange mix of anger, sorrow, and satisfaction. Because I hadn't just uncovered the truth, I had taken control of the narrative. I wasn't a victim anymore. But the story didn't end there. I had one final step to take, something he wouldn't see coming. Something that would make sure this betrayal didn't just hurt me, it would leave a lasting lesson. And as I prepared to make that move, I saw the fear in his eyes, the first real fear I had ever witnessed from him. Some moments in life don't just change the present, they redefine your entire sense of power. That night, as Mark sat frozen across from me, I realized I held the upper hand in a way he never imagined. Months of manipulation, lies, and cold silences had led to this moment. But I wasn't going to react with anger or tears. I was going to respond with clarity. I opened the final part of the folder, a carefully organized record of everything he'd tried to hide, the messages, the photos, the receipts, every little breadcrumb he'd left. I didn't have to speak. I just slid it across the table. His face went pale. His hands shook. And for the first time, I saw him as I had months ago, vulnerable, exposed, completely powerless. I calmly said, I knew, Mark. All of it. And I've already decided how this ends. He tried to interrupt, but I shook my head. I had nothing left to prove to him. I had planned my next steps carefully, not for revenge in the way people think, but for closure, for justice, and most importantly, for my own peace. I wasn't letting him drag me down or make me feel small. I was taking back my story. Have you ever felt that kind of clarity, the moment you realize someone who hurt you no longer controls your emotions? That's what it felt like. The anger didn't burn me, it fueled me. The betrayal didn't break me, it sharpened me. And the quiet power of showing someone their truth, letting it speak for itself, is far more devastating than any scream or confrontation. As Mark sat there, trembling, I realized something. Betrayal is never just about lies. It's about underestimating the person you thought was weak. And I wasn't weak. I was strategic, patient, and unshakable. The divorce would happen, yes. But on my terms, with my dignity intact, and with the truth finally out in the open. So I smiled one last time, closed the folder, and walked away, calm, composed, victorious. And as I left the restaurant, I thought to myself, the silence that screamed finally spoke. And in that silence, I found my freedom. If you've ever faced betrayal, ask yourself, do you confront it blindly, or do you wait, watch, and let the truth hit at exactly the right moment? Sometimes, the strongest response isn't anger, it's clarity.